So, Mick, I want to get straight into this U.S. congressional hearing. That's why I've put us nicely in the room, as it were, today on UAP that occurred about a week or so ago. So, first of all, what was the context that led up to this hearing, and why did this hearing come about roughly now?
Well, I think the hearing is kind of a culmination of something that's been going on for a very long time, but really more recently started with the New York Times article in 2017. Which was called Glowing Auras and Black Money. And it was about essentially revealing that the Pentagon had a UFO investigation program. And they also revealed a couple of interesting videos that have yet to be bettered, in fact, in terms of what's been released in terms of quality. But over the following years, I think we're seeing kind of two things kind of coming to a head. One of which is essentially a PR campaign by people who believe that UFOs are aliens. And they're convinced that the US government knows something about this, and they're pressuring the US government to reveal it. And so they've essentially been lobbying the US government. And then we also have a number of very real issues that have kind of come about, I think, to do with newer technology, things like drones, and perhaps to a certain degree, changes in sensors and the types of radar that are being used, which are causing a lot more both actual sightings of UFOs and concern about possible technology like drones specifically that might be an issue. And so the military is interested in investigating those, which are unidentified aerial phenomena or UFO, and so there's a genuine thing. Yeah. But then it's all got folded together with this thing with the alien believers.
Makes sense. So Mick, what was your overall sort of overarching assessment of the hearing, and did it move forward, if at all, discussion and investigation of UAP, or was it a bit of a nothing burger?
Well, I mean, it depends who you talked to. I think a lot of people are very happy that it simply happened at all because they feel like that's taking it seriously. In terms of what they talked about in the hearing, there was a number of things. There was, they talked about the process they're going to do, how they're going to set things up, and roughly, they're going to investigate and they're going to collaborate with other departments, blah, blah, blah. They talked a little bit about, some existing cases, they showed some video. And then there was like kind of questions from the Congress people. And that was kind of interesting because they kind of brought up what I would consider to be kind of UFO mythology, which perhaps wasn't in the public sphere before. It's known within the UFO community because it's like these foundational things, like the idea that UFOs are messing with our nuclear weapons, or the idea that this admiral wrote this thing about recovered air flying saucers. But there really wasn't very much that was new. And I think people are just kind of, in the UFO community, are just kind of happy that something happened at all. They didn't really expect it to be mind-blowing, although there was a lot of anticipation about it, and they were hoping that something would come out. But much ado about nothing, really.
It does seem a little bit like that. And Ramsey, Mick sort of teed that up a little bit, that they get folded together, this sort of idea of UFOs or aliens with a legitimate sort of military concern. So my question to you, Ramsey, first of all, is why do we need this kind of a task force? So the hearings made it very clear that many UAP, I think it said 80 out of 144 in the recent UAP report, are observed on multiple sensors, so they're indeed real objects or occurrences, maybe meteorological phenomena, but real things.
In the Director of National Intelligence 2021 unclassified report, the ODNI reported 144 UAPs between 2004 and 2021, 80% of which were recorded on multiple instruments.
What are the main drivers for the military to want to better understand these aerial phenomena?
Yeah, so there's definitely two overriding important facts that we can consider here, which is that there's much more complicated sensors being used now than there would have been like 25, 30 years ago. And it's a non-linear thing, right? The number of issues that can be with the sensors, how complicated they are, the sheer amount of software, and therefore the sheer amount of bugs, how difficult it is to understand things that are on those sensors when they're as complicated as they are, is all getting sort of dramatically out of hand. And the users of those sensors are reporting an ever-growing number of things they don't understand with what they're seeing on them. And the useful thing about this kind of oversight is that you can have one high-level organization that is at least trying to set some kind of behavior across all of the people that are using the sensors, because the impression I've got from reading up and listening to this is that there's possibly not much communication going on between different forces in the US. The Navy and the Air Force don't seem to be collaborating as much as they could be. So it could simply be that there's some US Air Force tech that is not being revealed to the US Navy that causes problems. As was discussed in the congressional hearings, there were statements like, this isn't black projects and stuff, but that is always the default answer. The answer to both, yes, it is a black project, and no, it isn't a black project, is this is not a black project. So, publicly, we're never going to get anything different to that, but the closed hearings potentially could shed a bit more light on aspects like that, maybe.
So there's a lot more stuff in the air basically as well since the 1960s. So Mick, I think I saw a tweet from is it Greenstreet? I think it's Steve Greenstreet on your Twitter, and he said, look, regardless of whether you want to talk about aliens or UFOs or whatever it is, we do have a clutter problem and a potential problem with people flying things around in the air, don't we? So there's been a lot of things changed since the 60s when Project Blue Book ended or around that era. There's a lot more stuff in the air that we, A, put there, and B, potentially don't understand because of the evolution of the sensors. Is that a major motivation behind why such a task force is useful?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is something they talked about in the UAP report that came out in the middle of last year. They categorized what they thought the UAP would break down into, like one of 5 categories. And the first thing that they listed is clutter, airborne clutter, and they categorize that as birds, balloons, UAVs, drones, and other things like plastic bags, even. That's like things just being blown aloft in the air, just things that are cluttering up the airspace. So it's kind of like this accidental clutter where you get balloons in the air, and clutter just from the airspace getting more crowded because drones are getting incredibly cheap now. Even like you say 10 years ago, it was kind of a bit of a niche activity because they were relatively expensive. But now you can pick one up at the supermarket for less than $100, and you can go fly it up, hundreds of feet in the air, and you can fly it up into a flight path, and it's not that difficult to tweak them to remove the height limiters. I think one very interesting thing that came out of the hearings for me was that Scott Bray, one of the officials who talked, specifically mentioned Mylar balloons.
Reports of sightings are frequent and continuing. We attribute this increase in reporting to a number of factors, including our work to destigmatize reporting, an increase in the number of new systems such as quadcopters and unmanned aerial systems that are in our airspace, identification of what we can classify as clutter, Mylar balloons and other types of air trash, and improvements in the capabilities of our various sensors to detect things in our airspace.
And this, I think, is a very interesting thing. Not only because 100% of all the identified things in the report were balloons, which is only one, of course. There's only one thing they actually managed to identify, but that one was a balloon. But also because a lot of the eyewitness accounts, specifically from this one pilot, Ryan Graves, say that they started seeing these things on radar after they upgraded their radar. And they weren't there on the old radar, and they got the new radar, and that it showed more of these strange tracks. And I'm wondering if it's just that the new radar is a bit more sensitive to things like Mylar balloons, which of course are metallic coated balloons, and you use similar metallic coated plastic for radar chaff to confuse radars. So perhaps, given that there's lots of balloons in the air, people releasing for parties and whatnot, perhaps this is a significant part of the problem, and the fact that he mentioned that might indicate that.
Yeah.
Well, a relatively famous quote on this is that the modern phased array radars can see a metal tennis ball sized object at 200 kilometers. And of course, a metallized party balloon is much bigger than a metal tennis ball. And so they will pick them up. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's a known issue in that area. The training ranges were off Virginia Beach, and they have a huge problem on the beaches around that area with party balloons being washed up on the beaches. They did, like, there was a study, and they collected all the party balloons. I think they got like over 100,000 over 5 years. And so there's obviously a lot of stuff just floating around. If the wind's right, it's going to blow out into these training ranges. So that's, one issue. But of course, you can't narrow this down to one explanation. They said quite explicitly that we think it's in these 5 categories, and within the 5 categories, there's multiple subcategories. And so any one explanation, say balloons, is only going to be a subset of that. So there's going to be balloons, there's going to be drones, there's going to be perhaps weather-related radar anomalies, and then there might be other things as well. There might be foreign powers trying to spy on us, or there might be aliens. Who knows?
Yeah. And sensor problems. But one of the interesting things that I picked up specifically from the congressional hearing was that they specifically said.
I can give you the quote. I can give you the quote.
Yeah,
if you
go
want,
for
Rams, if you give me a second, and we'll raise it with Mick. So one thing Scott Bray said, and I quote during the hearing, is
the biggest way you avoid technological surprise is by collecting this type of data, and by importantly calibrating the assumptions that you go into with how you do that analysis. I'll tell you, within the UAP task force, we have one basic assumption, and that is that generally speaking, our sensors operate as designed. And we make that assumption because many times these are multi-sensor collections. We make no assumptions about the origin of this or that there may or may not be some sort of technology that we don't understand. That's, I think, the key to avoiding technological surprises, by calibrating those assumptions.
Generally speaking, our sensors operate as designed. And I thought both of you might be salivating at that comment. So I will open the floor to both of you. Rams, if you want to start, and then I can see Mick is already spinning up for that one.
Well, Mick, you go first.
Well, it's funny because in the UAP report, they very specifically said that some of these anomalous readings may be sensor errors. So I don't know why they've suddenly changed their mind and said that the sensors are all working perfectly. And of course, sensors ideally would work perfectly, but they have a bunch of known issues, and they probably have a bunch of unknown issues. And it's not just sensors, it's also software. And the way that software integrates the sensor readings with the broader picture that is being displayed to the pilots and software. I'm a former software engineer, and I still program, and I know that it's very difficult to make fault-free software. Especially when you get a new version. We've all had the experience of having our computers upgrade and then start working. You're supposed to improve it, but it actually makes it worse. And the same thing does happen in the military. Obviously, they're a lot more careful, but it's literally impossible to create software that's entirely fault-free. So you assume the sensors are working, but also the same people essentially said that sometimes they don't.
In your background, what did you make of the 2 specific UAP encounters that were shown in the hearing? So we had a silver orb flying past a plane window, and we had some green triangles at night seen through supposedly night vision goggles. So what did you make of those 2 encounters, Mick?
Well, first of all, I think they could have shown much better clips than those. I think they must have things that are better, because we know that they have things like the gimbal video and the go fast video, which are more interesting videos. But the 2 they showed, there was the green triangle one, which is something that I basically explained a year ago, and essentially came up with the exact same explanation that they did, that the triangle shape is due to the type of camera that was being used, and these things were not actually triangular shaped. They identified them as drones. I think the first video is probably more likely still a plane, but I was always like, it's either a plane or it's a drone, and that's it. It's not a green triangle. But question there is, why did it take them what they described as several years before they figured this out? It seems like people who are working in this small corner of the Pentagon that investigates UAPs really don't have very much in the way of resources if they can let something like that just languish for forever, when all they've got to do is ask someone who knows a little bit about cameras and they would have it explained to them.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting, and it was good because it validated my interpretation of the event. And a lot of people were saying this is 100% not bokeh being the out of focus triangles. But now it is, so that was great. But also, do
you think it was shown because it was an example where they could say we got this UAP phenomenon and we solved it? Was that really sort of maybe what was being shown there? And a couple of the Congress people did say, are we just going to focus on ones that we can solve and not look at the other ones?
Yeah,
was a comment that came up.
Yeah, well, they couldn't solve the other one, but this one, the triangle one, yes, it was an example I think that they gave where they did actually investigate it and they did kind of solve it, but they didn't really give any details about what these drones were. They said that at some point the drones were swarming the ship, and was this an exercise? Was it like a secret blue on blue thing? Like with somebody else doing it, or was it like foreign people, or was it like someone flying a drone off a cruise ship and a bunch of misidentification? We don't know what the actual details were. We just know this one thing about it's not actually a triangle. So it's very unclear as to why they actually showed that one. And then the other one they gave as an example of how little data they have to work with.
Yeah.
And I think this is what they were saying. Like, here's a video. They showed the video, 8 seconds long, shows the camera moving around the cockpit a bit, and then the last 1 second, or the last 1/10 of a second, it shows an object fly by. It's only visible for 3 frames, or like 2.5 frames, and you can't really tell what it is, or what it's doing, or how big it is, or anything like that. And Scott Bray said, "That's all we have." In that case. Although later he kind of hinted there might be some sensor data, but then he said we have at least this. But he said this is what we have, and in many cases we have less than this.
How successful do you think this hearing and recent pushes have been in sort of changing that stigma from little green men to a more serious field of investigation? You still seem to allude that it's kind of folded together and there's sort of 2 streams, because they said in the hearing that they're now up to sort of 400 plus of these events from 133 or so in the UAP report. Yeah. And Scott Bray made a big sort of celebration of this being the stigma has the stigma has been removed. Now people are reporting. Look at the data explode.
Since the release of that preliminary report, the UAP Task Force database has now grown to contain approximately 400 reports. The stigma has been reduced.
But then we see these terrible pieces of data that he has. So have we changed the stigma?
I don't think there'd be any stigma in reporting that thing flying by, because obviously it's something that happened and they got it on video. And if you saw a silver orb fly past your plane, then why wouldn't you report it? It's not like you're actually seeing little green men. You're just seeing some bit of airspace clutter. And I think it would be very easy to remove the stigma. And all you've got to do is say, like, we're concerned about drones and novel foreign aircraft coming into our airspace, and so be on the lookout for anything that's unusual. And also you could just say that perhaps they will appear to look strange because they'll be made to look strange to get past our defenses. It really wouldn't be that difficult to impress upon people that you should report strange things in the sky if there is an actual security threat from strange things coming into the airspace. So I think that excuse that there's this stigma probably did have some validity 5, 10, 20 years ago. But it's something now, I think, that with the increasing awareness of foreign drones and foreign unmanned aerial vehicles of varying types, not just quadcopters, but various other things as well, I think that the stigma has probably largely dissipated, unless you're seeing something that's so incredibly outrageous that you can't report it. But we generally don't. People see lights off in the distance. They see blips on their radar, and they go over there and they see some kind of fuzzy dot. They don't fly over there and see a giant levitating pirate ship full of dancing aliens. They see boring things, which are very straightforward to report.
Mick, what do you make of that interplay between? There was talk in the hearing of interfacing with MUFON and civilian groups and the sort of people on Terror in the Sky documentary. These kind of people. I can't see how that's going to be possible from a security perspective and even just a data quality and synchronization perspective. Any
think
take on that?
The only way that might be useful is if you just treat it as some kind of aggregated data source that you can kind of process, perhaps using artificial intelligence or just simple data processing techniques to get some kind of averages about locations and types and things like that. But the quality of the data on MUFON is really terrible. You get a lot of people just see a light in the sky and they point their phone at it, or they put a verbal report in. I saw a light that looked weird in the sky, and that's about all you get. So it's very difficult to actually get anything of any quality out of that. So I don't think there's going to be much there. I mean, MUFON, they got like a mention at the start of the hearing, but really, they haven't really done very much. Although they do have an interesting connection in that they were essentially acquired, I think, by what's his name, Robert Bigelow, who was part of this original ORSAP program. He was the original contractor, back in 2008, something like that. And he kind of teamed up with MUFON and made it kind of a private data collection thing. It's all very strange, but I think now, I don't think there's going to be much use for some kind of public data collection like that unless they get better at filtering out things, which means manpower, which means money, and they don't really have money, so it's not going to work.
As we sort of wrap up these hearings, Mick, what do you think are the next steps forward? Are there going to be more hearings? We heard about potential release of data. You've been commenting on these matters for a while, and it seems that there've been a few times where the Department of Defense has come up with ideas around standardizing procedures and getting a department together, and it never really happens. Do you expect things to be different this time and this to really take off?
I expect them to address the real issues like airspace clutter. Part of that's probably going to be classified because it's a national security issue. Perhaps if it's related to sensors, that might be an issue, but maybe they'll say something like there's too many balloons off the coast of Virginia Beach. Perhaps they will explain some of the videos. Now, I would like them, if there's videos that are out there that are getting an immense amount of public interest and lots of different takes on them, and some of which are definitely wrong, some of which might be right, it really doesn't hurt them to at least give some clarity as to what they've done. Like you can rule something in or out without jeopardizing national security. But again, that type of thing takes manpower. Someone's got to go in there and figure out how classified is this. And I just don't think there's really that many people working on the UAP task force. They talk about they have all these scientists and whatnot, but really they just have the phone numbers of these scientists, and so they can call them up and ask them questions.
And we can ask,
So they don't. They could have solved lots of these things a long time ago, but they just don't have the actual resources to actually do it. And perhaps this recent wave of interest will prompt a bit more of that, but I'm not very hopeful.